podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to How Are the Podcast from Roker Report as we continue to run through another one of our top 10 series. And this is where we shamelessly steal the Match of the Day top 10 format and apply a Sunderland specific topic to it. And last time out, we assessed the Sunderland talent in central defence during the Stadium of Light era. And today we need to look to those who played alongside them because we're going to be ordering the top 10 Sunderland fullbacks of the Stadium of Light era. So once again, I'm not going to do this alone. And to help me, I once again have three gentlemen who are eager to stick their necks out and provide their views on who they think the best fullbacks, who's graced the red and white stripes since we moved to our new home way back in 1997. I keep calling it a new home just because I saw it being built, and I think it was built 2 minutes ago, but it's been a bloody long time. I'll have to keep remembering that. And I'll look at one person we've got on today, and he was born after the Stadium of Light, which is absolutely insane. Exactly, Bomber. He's given the V's. So, first up, we'll introduce the people we've got on today. And first up, we've got the man who will have the conviction that he's just 100% right. It is, of course, Gavin Henderson. Hello, Gav.
Hello. I'm going to win again today. I might not have won the previous times, but my own head I won. And listeners can't see this, but I've manifested this, so I've put never wrong as my display name on this call, just so people are aware that I am never wrong. So yeah, let's see how I do today.
Yeah, you've said that once or twice on the last few pods that we've done of these you've been on. But strange one, fullbacks, isn't it? Because we talked a little bit that central defence was different to strikers because you haven't got those stats. But fullbacks, we tried to put that 10 together. Odd, isn't it?
Yeah, and we were talking as well before we came on air that when you think like long and hard about each season, which sometimes can cause serious mental stress, that more often than not, we've actually played a lot of people out of position. We've put centre-halves at fullback. We've put midfield players at fullback who've actually done pretty well there and then ended up staying there. So it is a weird position, but I mean, more sort of in the modern era, you look at fullbacks and you can see the stats and you can see the assists they've got and if they've getting a few goals, and great. And I think traditionally we like to think of a Sunderland fullback as somebody who really gets stuck in, and I separate that out a bit. You know, like left backs bomb on attacking players. Right backs are normally hard and get stuck in, and that would be my stereotype of a Sunderland fullback. So it should be quite interesting when we see how we've put this list together, because I think each player on there is very different from all of the others. Don't think there's too many of them who are similar. So yeah, it should be good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got some. Well, I'll try and pull out some interesting stats I've been looking at throughout to try and differentiate from those different players who you talked about. But next up, we have someone who I'm very glad agreed to appear in another top 10 after his top pick in the central defenders, because that required some genius level logic. It is, of course, our very own Johnny Blue. It's Johnny Hawley. Hello, Johnny.
Yeah, good morning, Chris. Nice reference there again to the little Mensa crack. I'll give you that one, but you've not slipped it by us this time. Yeah, I've had half a coffee, so I'm alert this time.
All right, we'll see about that, man. Yeah, I mean, Gav's kind of touched on it. You know, it is funny that kind of, you know, you almost think of a cultured left-sided player rather than that kind of bruiser on the right. I hadn't actually thought about it that way, but the other thing to think about, and I don't know whether this came into your thinking, but you've almost got to think about the winger they played with as well, and kind of that, you know, how well did they play with them, or did they just ignore them and stand on the halfway line?
Yeah, it's similar to what we've said. I think we touched on it in the centre halves list as well, didn't we? About, you know, that some of them were luckier than others to have certain partnerships, whereas others were maybe carrying a bit more of the load themselves. And the same's definitely true with fullbacks. I mean, like you say, you've got the relationship with the winger, you've got the relationship with whoever's inside in the making up the rest of the back four. But I can't even pretend that came too much into me thinking, because I was struggling so much in the first place just to make any sort of sense out with the list. just by looking at the names of these 10 players, I couldn't start thinking about 10 wingers and 10 centre-backs as well. Otherwise, I'd still be making the list in a month's time. This is all just me trying to cover myself because I'm terrified of the response to this list. So, yeah, get ready.
Yeah, every top 10 starts with people doing their caveats to right, trying to explain what we're already before they even tell us their top 10s. And because actually also joining us is someone who's actually appearing on his first top 10. And I did forget about this until he sent me a list of names with random numbers next to them, which meant I had to actually check whether it was the order of the list or the numbers next to them that defined what order he'd put them in, because I couldn't tell either way, if I'm completely honest. And once we get into it, mate. But I'm pleased to welcome Roker Report's Jim White, which is, of course, Bomber. Hello, Bomber.
Hello, Mr. Wynn. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello. I'm good. I mean, we're talking about fullbacks and trying to order them, and it's Gav kind of touched on a personal preference because people prefer a bruiser. Some people prefer a cultured player who goes on the overlap and sticks some crosses in. And so what was your criteria when you
Well, that was the first thing I was going to say, actually, is that as a former left-sided player and former left-sided fullback, I can assure you that not all left-sided fullbacks bomb on. And
so we've got an expert on the panel.
I didn't
realise, right? Okay.
Yeah, I've very much taken my amateur career down the Julio Arca route of playing left midfield, left back, and going further and further back as I got older, and ended up at centre half.
So, cultured left back were you, or were you
I had a nice left foot on me, mate. Yeah,
fair.
No, couldn't head a ball, couldn't put a tackle in, which, considering I'm 6'4" and 16, 17 stone, probably is surprising to hear. But yeah, I couldn't head a ball. Would have actively avoid heading the ball, but I was on all set pieces and stuff because I did have a pretty good left foot.
Sounds like a few of the fullbacks who've missed out on our top 10, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm surprised I didn't make the top 10, to be fair. But yeah, it's a difficult one. I think for me, being very, I guess, having an affinity to fullbacks in particular, I find it very difficult. I tried to go on some sort of combination of like the impact that they had on the team, because obviously there's some people in here who played longer than others and had a lot more appearances than others. Kind of what legacy they left, and actually what it came down to was what they meant to me as a Sunderland fan, and tried to extrapolate that out to the rest of the fan base. And yeah, I mean, I changed it about 4 or 5 times. I'm sticking to my convictions now. I'm not going to make any caveats. I'm going to die on each of these 10 hills that I'm about to stand on. So yeah, let's do it.
I did notice you changed it because you just sent me a load of random names with random numbers in a random order. I had to try.
To start off with, you gave me the list, and I just put the number next to them in the order which you gave them to me. So partly on you, but I fully appreciate that. It's probably a bit lazy of me because it meant I didn't have to write them out in a different order.
A peek for the listeners behind the high-tech curtain of what goes on assembly top 10 lists there, by the way.
I mean, it's very professional as we get set up. But anyway, let's crack on, because I said we are shamelessly stealing the BBC Match of the Day top 10 format. You might have heard one of our previous ones. I think I'm trying to think off the top of my head. We've done goalkeepers, we've done central defenders, we've done strikers, we've done managers. I think that might be it so far. So you might have one of them. So anyone not familiar, we pick a subject to rank, which in this case is the top 10 Sunderland AFC fullbacks of the Stadium Light era. So first of all, we had to shorten that list down to 10, which was, you might have heard, was a bit of a process in itself going back. And I mean, actually, I think the fullbacks, I don't think we've had as many messages going backwards and forwards changing the top 10 the fullbacks as we did for any of the others, by the way. I think that was the most difficult one actually in doing that top 10, because then when we got the shortlist, we're now placing those top 10 into order from best to worst. Now, the 3 of them, of course, done their order. They have sent them to me, so the 3 gentlemen have no idea what order the other ones have put them in, and we'll find out. And if you've heard on previous pods, some of the reaction when people are going through their bottom 5s and then their top 5s, it makes for some. I mean, I kind of wish we put this out as a video at times, because people's reactions when people go through their, at the very least, raised eyebrows. as people frantically write them down and see where they are and how they compare. But again, as we try to kind of shoehorn players who are on the edge of the Stadium Light era, we might mention into the shortlist of 10. The reason for going back for the Stadium Light era, it just makes it more effective if the lads have actually experienced seeing the players in action. Even with Jonny, it's kind of pushing it, but at least it gives us a starting point. So we're covering the Stadium Light era. So let's get into our top 10 that's been selected in the end for us to discuss. In alphabetical order, we've got Chris Macon, Danny Rose, Dennis Sirkin, George McCartney, Julio Walker, Marcus Alonso, Michael Gray, Patrick Van Arnold, Phil Bardsley, and Trey Hume. And just a few to miss out. And it's a really strange thing as we went through, but some players in here, you'll hear that, played fullback a little bit and maybe were potentially a really good fullback. And we'll get into this conversation because we've got the likes of El Mohammadi. I originally was going for Martin Scott, but you have to remember how many games he played at the Stadium Light, even though I thought he was fantastic before that era. We've got Stephen Wright in there. We've got Alan Hutton, Patrice Carteron. Wasn't here for long, but scored against the Mag, so he has to get a mention, really, doesn't he? I was talking about Danny Collins because I thought some of his best football he played for Sunderland was at fullback. Then you've got the likes of the strange ones, the likes of Craig Gardner, Jack Colback, Kieran Richardson. They were good players who filled in at fullback and did a job there from time to time. But Gav, I mean, again, we're talking about the sheer volume of messages going backwards and forwards. This was, probably the toughest one to put down in terms of that top 10. I mean, who's unlucky to miss out?
I tell you what, most of them messages were me going off it because Jonny wanted to put Ahmed El Mohammadi in there.
Right.
No way he was going to be on that list.
Right. That group chat, is a safe space. Okay. Don't be outing me like this.
There's not a chance he would have been on my list ever. I would have refused to do the podcast. He was shite. And he barely played right back. So, but most of them names you've just reeled off there were players, like I said at the start, who were midfielders or centre halves who ended up playing fullback and did quite well there. And even in our top 10, there's players who actually made that transition and ended up staying there. So, it's some of the suggestions, though. I mean, Martin Scott would, if this had been of the last 25 years podcast, the last 35 years podcast, he would have definitely been in there because he was obviously outstanding at Roker Park for us. But yeah, by the time we got to the Stadium of Light, he was finished, wasn't he? So it's a shame he misses out in that regard.
Thanks, Gav. I felt a little bit younger when you said 25 years. Then you just go and extend it, didn't you?
Yeah.
But again, just quickly, Gav, I mean, who was the best of the rest for you? I mean, who's kind of pushing? Is there any of them unlucky to miss out? Or
I would say Danny Collins has been a bit unfortunate. I would probably put him neck and neck with my 10th place person who we'll get onto. Mm-hmm. I actually thought he did brilliantly there for us, but I don't know. I always look at Danny Collins as more of a out and out defender rather than a fullback, so it's a hard one. And play, as you said off air, Danny Collins played some of his best football for Sunderland at left back, so yeah, probably a bit unlucky not to make the list, but it is a good top 10.
Yeah, well, I'll just for, again, behind the curtain, I had him in there. But you're right, in terms of him, I think people do look at him as a kind of centre half rather than a fullback. But Jonny, come on then, Al Mohammadi.
Right.
Why?
I just want to put some context there.
I think you should.
So I would have had Danny Collins in if I didn't think he was a centre back. I think he played there too much, and for me, he was more of a centre back than he was a left back, right? And that was the logic that underpinned everything in my head. So I basically had nobody who played centre back in me thinking, which left only the failed wingers, to try and pad out the rest of the top 10. Because I'm not sticking Craig Gardner or Jack Colback in there. I'm sorry, I'm just not. I've got too much self-respect. And coming from a man who just said Ahmed El Mohammadi could be in this list, that should tell you how low I think of them two being considered. Not that I thought they were terrible players, but they weren't fullbacks.
I do think the message was Elmo in block capitals with an exclamation mark, I think was
you shorten one player's name, right? But no, seriously, I think if anything, that just shows you how difficult it is to put this top 10 together for a different reason to the other ones. I think centre halves we struggled because you're actually overflowing with names in a sense, particularly because you've got a lot of partnerships and there's just a lot of good players to consider. This one, I think, how many times did we all bemoan, particularly in that 10-year spell in the Premier League, like square pegs in round holes in so many team selections? And I think the prime area of the pitch where that happened was fullback, because we just didn't have quality out-and-out fullbacks for so much of that time that we were forced to just make do. And I think you can see that reflected in this list, because there are so many of the players who maybe could have been in but haven't, were those kind of stopgaps, or they played there a bit, but really they were a midfielder or a winger or what have you. So, yeah, I think it's slim pickings to a degree, but not to say that the 10 on the list aren't at least good footballers.
I think one person who's probably a little bit unlucky not to get a mention because he was brilliant for us, but ultimately didn't play enough games, is probably Anthony Revier. I thought he done very well for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Came in, was at the tail end of his career, but was a classy operator and played left and right back, didn't he? But he just didn't play enough games for us, really. He was brought in as a short-term fix to a long-term fullback problem and did a job. But yeah, I would mention him if we're mentioning El Mohammadi and fucking people like that, you've got to mention him. I'm not letting this drop.
Why
by
do
the
you
way,
hate
Johnny.
El Mohammadi so much?
He was just shit. I hated him.
Anti-Elmo.
When we signed him, and it was like, oh, we're signing the Egyptian Beckham, and he was fuck all like him. And then he went elsewhere and did better than he did at Sunderland, which always annoys us, because that never happens, does it?
So basically, you're bitter that he was better at Hull than he was at Sunderland.
Aye, yeah, I am.
Sorry, I'm getting grief for mentioning his name. Gav just called him Beckham, right? Can we? No.
He was. Does anyone else remember this? He was sold to us as the Egyptian Beckham. I remember that being the thing. We're signing the Egyptian Beckham.
I always recall him as like a poor man's Arca. That's how I remember him.
That's an insult to Arca. I'm sorry. He was absolutely cack. I just didn't like him at all.
Well, I mean, he was that bad, but yeah.
I mean,
if you're listening, Ahmed, sorry, mate.
I mean, Bomber, as you said, based on your professional or semi-professional or Sunday League career that you said earlier, I mean, anyone gets put back to fullback, basically, don't they? As you described.
Yeah, as the years go by, mate, you get further and further back on the battlefield.
But it's funny because in all the others we talked about, the Stadium Light era, especially when we've gone back and we looked at strikers, looked at centre halves, as Johnny said. And you go back and season after season, you go, right, take them two, put them on the list. Take them two, put them on the list. Fullbacks, there seemed to be this huge gap in the middle where we didn't really have any specialised fullbacks for quite some time. And, as I kind of mentioned, you end up kind of, the conversation veers off to the likes of Craig Gardner, Jack Colback. But you've also got someone in there like Kieran Richardson, who I almost think his ego almost got in his way, that if he'd stayed as a specialised left back, he would potentially have getting more England caps. Mm-hmm. He would have been at the top of the game, but instead he was like, oh no, I'm too good for fullback. I want to play in centre midfield or left midfield or get involved in that. Whereas I think Kieran Richardson could have been one of the country's best fullbacks if he just specialised in that position.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's what, when you mentioned Richardson, that was something that I was going to mention, that if he'd applied himself and accepted that was probably a better natural position for him, I've got no doubt he would have probably played left back for England, because I know we had Ashley Cole obviously in those. Would he have been around at that time?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. But yeah, I mean, he was, in terms of his pace, and he had ability, and he was left-footed, and that was for England. We struggled down that side throughout, so he could have been a very good understudy for Ashley Cole. Ashley Cole dominated that left back position for pretty much his entire career. So, but there is a bit of a stigma about fullbacks, isn't there? There's that I can't remember who it was now. Nobody wants to be a Gary Neville. Comment. I think it might have been Roy Keane. But yeah, there is a bit of a stigma about being fullback, and I definitely think Richardson's ego got the better of him in failing to accept that was probably his best position. So he misses out, and there's a couple like that as well. Like I actually felt that Craig Gardner, it was probably better for us at right back than he was at centre back, at centre midfield as well. There's a couple like that that's difficult, but for all intents and purposes, that they're not fullbacks. So I'm quite glad to not see them on the list.
Yeah, mentioned. Alan Hutton, Bomber, is he unlucky to miss out?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. He's one who I was a little bit of an advocate for. I know he didn't play an awful lot for us, but there's people on this list that didn't play an awful lot for us. So I think for him to miss out because of that is a bit of a shame. But equally, I'm looking at this list and I don't know who I'd take him out, who I'd take out and put him in for.
Yeah. Okay.
I think Alan Hutton, if we'd got a full season out of him, would have been on this list. I thought he was an unbelievable player. He just couldn't stay fit, could he?
I genuinely think if he had hair, we'd have put him on this list. And I'm almost not joking. You see people talk about like the lads at Brentford, like Mbumo and Visser and that, they'd be more fashionable if they had, nice hair and, they looked flash.
Bomber, is he having a go at us?
I know. You're talking to two people who've got shaven heads, Johnny. You need to be careful, mate.
Hey, no, I'm advocating on your behalf. I'm saying you're underrated.
We don't need you to speak for us.
He's not underrated by us, Baldies. Don't worry about it.
Actually, do you want someone who has El Mohammedi's name in their mouth to be speaking for you? Possibly not. Like,
do you, mate? I mean, honestly, I've made sure I've tried to get as many stats in front of us to try and justify everything, and you come up with if he had hair, then he'd be, in the top 10. But anyway,
that's why Nyron Nosworthy misses out as well as best fullback.
And I was advocating for him as well. Yeah, it's a pattern of behaviour. Well, that's all I'm saying.
He used to kick the ball out for a corner from the halfway line at fullback, and then turned into an actual footballer at centre half. So I think we'll leave Nyron Nosworthy there. Right, let's get into our top 10s, because as I think I've touched on, we really haven't had a spread on the choices like the ones today. Just to do a sneak peek, a couple of examples. Only one player has been picked in the top 5 in all 3 lists. A total of 7 players appear in the top 3 across all 3 of your lists. So we really need to get into it. And we're going to start with Gav. Could you start and give us your countdown from 10 up to 6, please?
Gladly. In 10, and I mentioned this person as somebody who I saw as neck and neck with Danny Collins, is George McCartney. Number 9, I've got Patrick Van Aanholt. Number 8, I have Dennis Cirkin. Number 7, I have Marcus Alonso. And at number 6, we have Phil Bardsley.
Yes, some wide eyes and some boos and all that from the gallery. But we're going to start with George McCartney, bottom of the pile. And as we'll come on to say, I don't think it's too much of a giveaway that he ends up being bottom overall in the combined list. It's obviously there's slightly, you could argue there's 2 different McCartneys, Gav. There's the one that we saw coming through and, as a young'un, and you thought, really go for it. And then there's the one that we bought back. But as we kind of touched on, he's done well to make the top 10, Gav.
Yeah. Had a cracking first spell, I would say. Obviously, the more we sort of descended and the less the investment was going into the team, he became more important. And wasn't he captain for a little while there as well? I think, I can't quite remember. But he, came through the system, through the reserves into the first team when Peter Reid was in charge. And then I think by the time he left, he was pretty well established, wasn't he? Played, and this is something which people probably forget, because it doesn't happen that often. But he played over 200 times for the club, which is commendable. Not many players can really say that about the time with Sunderland. And yeah, I think he was a fine player. He did very well for us. I'm a little bit disappointed that, after all that time, all that investment of time with George McCartney, when he left, we lost him for very little, really. I mean, what was it? I think it was, we got £600,000 in Clive Clark for him. And Clive Clark was absolutely useless. So we got a really raw deal. And then when we re-signed him, we paid £8 million for him, which just rankles with us. That's not his fault. That's the club's fault for really, not handling that particularly well. But he was somebody who played a lot of top-level football. I mean, like you say, he left us, went to West Ham and did really well for West Ham and then came back. And I think I've said this a few times on these sort of pods, that players in that era, they kind of get forgotten, because that was quite, despite the fact we won the league, I just think that era under McCarthy, where we got to the playoffs and the FA Cup semi-final, and then eventually, got promoted, we just kind of forget about it. It's almost like there was a gap that everyone forgets about between the Reid era and the Keane era, where it's like, oh, well, that just kind of happened and we don't really care too much about that. And he was obviously a big player in that moment. But no, good player who did pretty well for us. Poor in his second spell, but, all in, did very good for Sunderland, and I think he deserves to be in the top 10.
Yeah. I mean, Jonny, I'm going to move on to you with McCartney. We'll get your kind of 6 to 10 in a minute, but I'm not going to give too much away in terms of saying that McCartney was your bottom place pick as well. As Gav said, over kind of 200 appearances, or just over 200 appearances, 203 to be exact. Didn't score for Sunderland, actually, when I was looking into it. Played about the same amount of games in the Championship as he did the Premier League. And actually, people forget, as Gav said, during that McCarthy era, that the year we won the title, he got into the PFA Team of the Year for the Championship, and it ended up costing us big money. And in fact, Alan Kirbishley kind of resigned because he was sold back to Sunderland, because he was kind of that good a player for them. I think he was their Player of the Year, either that season or the season before. I can't remember, but yeah, I think sometimes people forget how good a player George McCartney was, and especially someone who came through the ranks as well.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think he suffers a little bit just because that second spell is more what I remember of him than the first spell anyway. So, possibly slightly weighted in the favour of the poorer spell, which I don't think does him any favours. But also just a lot of what Gav said, I think, rings true. He wasn't part of the most memorable Sunderland teams of the past 25 years or so. Yes, he had some success. And like you say, that season where was it 04, 05, I think, where we won the Championship title, and, he was brilliant that season. But, when people think back to promotions, you think of the Keane season, or you think of the 105-point season. You might think of the Wembley playoff final against Charlton for negative reasons, but they're the ones that spring to mind. It's not Mick McCarthy's team. So, yeah, I think McCartney gets a little bit sort of just, he gets a bit lost in the shake-up of players from these kind of few eras as you go back over the time at the Stadium of Light. And yeah, I mean, the 8 million re-signing was just that's just terrible business. That is what typical Sunderland used to be, which, hopefully we're changing the meaning of that term at the minute. But that would be right up there for me as kind of typical Sunderland is. Have a lad who does that well for you, let him go for nout. The player you bring in to replace him is so bad that the manager who was managing him starts slagging him off in his autobiography 10 years later, and then you re-sign him for 8 million, and yeah, just all around a bit of a puzzler, I think. So yeah, he's not a bad player, but he didn't stand out for me. There was nothing about him where I went, yeah, he's great.
Well, I mean, Bomber, look, again, I'll come up with your 6 to 10 in a minute, and we'll just give away where you've got McCartney, because you've got him a bit higher up in 6th. I mean, is Gav and Jonny kind of being a bit more focused on the fact we bought him back, and that we sold him for next to nothing, we bought him back for a lot of money, and kind of ignoring the fact that actually he was a really good player?
Possibly. I mean, it's interesting that both Gav and Jonny have both said that Mick McCarthy era was kind of like a forgotten era, because actually that's probably a prime era in my memory, and maybe that's because of how late I came to following Sunderland. But the in my mind, the Mick McCarthy teams that had John Stead and Dean Whitehead and Gary Breen and those sorts of, those are the players that kind of stick out. If you're asking me, list as many Sunderland players as you can from the 2000s, that's probably the era that I would go to. So I probably remember George McCartney a little bit more fondly, possibly because for that reason, because he's definitely that era isn't a forgotten era for me. I mean, he was, in terms of his longevity, Gav's already touched on it. He played, was it 200 times, did you say, Gav, for the club? And just in terms of Premier League experience, and he was never flashy, but he was just always solid. I'm referring pretty much to his first spell at the club, but I don't think his second spell should undo any of the positive thoughts that we think about. He had an underappreciated consistency, and he was always one that you always knew. There's some decent Sunderland teams have always got that 7 out of 10 player who's always a 7 out of 10, never drops below it, never does anything kind of absolutely fantastic. Probably, if you look down at the stats, he probably didn't pick up too many Man of the Match awards, but would have always been a 7 out of 10, which is more than we can say for a lot of Sunderland players, not just fullbacks over the period of time. I think his longevity probably is one of the main reasons why I've put him over some of the others that are in the list, without giving too much away.
But yeah, we'll find out in a minute. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I think he was just really underappreciated, and I'm reluctant to let his second spell kind of darken his first spell in my memory, I think.
No, fair play. And right, so we'll get into the others, bottom fives. Jonny, can we have your rundown from 10 up to 6, please?
Yeah, so 10, George McCartney. 9, Patrick Van Aanholt. 8, Dennis Serkin. So I think the same as Gav for 8 to 10. 7, Trey Hume. 6, Julio Arca.
Bomber's now got his head in his hands.
Gav doesn't look too happy either.
Which is funny. Let's go with Dennis Serkin in 8th, because he was actually the only unanimous decision across the board where he was 8th with all three of you. We mentioned, we touched on some injuries that George McCartney had, especially in that second spell at Sunderland. Jonny, with Dennis Serkin, we've got him 8th, and he hasn't been here, he's been here, I think, 3 years, something like that. But would it be over the top to say that if he wasn't as injury prone as he is, he wouldn't be playing for Sunderland?
Well, he certainly wouldn't have signed for us in the first place, I don't think. Whether it would have affected his time once he got here, possibly. He might have been snapped up by somebody maybe the January just gone or last summer or what have you. Because I think there's been links, hasn't there? Even with his current injury record, there's been good teams after him. But yeah, I think he's one of a few players that we've signed that we only have because they have something that's wrong with them, in inverted commas. The ability is not the problem. We all know how good Serkin is on his day. And I think he suffers, from that injury record, and similar to Hume, who I've put one place above him, they suffer from the fact that they've just never played for us in the top flight. So do this list next summer. It could be a very, very different placement for either of Serkin or Hume. But I think as we sit today on the whateverth of July that this goes out, I don't think you can put Serkin any higher than about 8th without contradicting yourself with some of the other names that are higher in the list. Because it's, for all that I was saying, it was a slim pickings for the list. There are actually, as you get higher up the list, it gets much more difficult to start justifying dropping people out to make room for a Serkin or a McCartney or whoever. So yeah, a bit of a victim of his ligaments, Serkin.
Well,
what you and Bomber giggling there while I'm talking. What?
Well, I just think you could do a pod where you go through our players and tell us what's wrong with them. Well, that's when you said that statement. But Bomber, 8th for you as well. Like I said, across the board. Is it that kind of kind of Premier League football that he hasn't got for Sunderland in his locker? Basically, that's what keeps him down at 8th.
I think so. Yeah, I think 8th is a fair position, and I kind of haven't got that much more to add that Jonny hasn't already said. He's clearly a very talented fullback. He's clearly a very injured fullback. You're quite right in that we probably wouldn't have got him if he didn't have those injury problems behind him. And hopefully he can start to put some of that literally behind him now and move on and can continue his upward trajectory. But yeah, I'm going to contradict myself at some point today. I can already see it come in, but yeah, he's he was very good for us in League One. He's been very good in the main part for us in the Championship. But there's people who I've ranked above him who were mainstays of Premier League squads, and for that reason, with an asterisk, as we'll find out later, he stays in 8th for me.
Yep, first contradiction of the day that you've set up. Well done, Bomber. Gav, as I said, 8th across the board. Everyone seems to be in agreement where he stands on this list. But what fullback is he? Because when I think of Dennis Serkin, I don't see a traditional defensive fullback, and I also think at times his injuries or his worry about injuries almost stops him from being that free-flowing fullback who's always on the overlap and stuff like that. So, what kind of fullback is Dennis Serkin?
I think he's. If it was like if you were trying to put it like in percentages, he would probably be 60% attacking, 40% defending. I think he's an all-rounder who's probably better at attacking than he is defending. I think he's a very good fullback. I think if everything works out for Dennis Serkin this season, he has a good season, stays fit, he'll be in the England squad. That's how good I think he could be. And England have got a real lack of quality left backs at the minute. So for a young lad to come along and play in the Premier League, an English left back, if he can stay fit, there's no reason why sort of as we get into 2026 that why he can't be in England squads. But it's that thing always hanging over him, isn't it, about his injuries that we've got to contend with. And unfortunately with Serkin, I think that might end up defining his career, because he's pretty much throughout his time at Sunderland, he's had problems with injuries. At the minute, it's his wrist. I think some fans spotted him in the airport with his arm in a sling over the summer, so he's had some work done on that, I think. That might just be to get him ready for the season. We don't know. We don't know anything about it. But I just hope he stays fit, because I think in there is a real quality footballer. There's a reason why he's being linked to the likes of Tottenham Hotspur. And I know it's his old club, they know all about him. But there's a reason why teams will be looking at him. And I think the only reason why somebody might not come in for Dennis Serkin is they, one, want to see what he does in the Premier League, but two, they want to see if he can stay fit. And if he can stay fit and has a good run up to January, I think we might struggle to hang on to him, particularly with him being in a contract year.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting because you talk about Dennis Serkin and we talk about injuries and things like this and what type of player he is. Interestingly, if I asked you, Gav, who had the kind of the biggest ratio in terms of yellow cards to games between Chris Macon and Dennis Serkin, who would you say had the highest ratio?
Well, I think you're going to say Dennis Serkin, but yeah, different eras though. I think referees are less lenient these days than they were back in Macon's day.
All right. So Dennis Serkin gets a yellow card for kicking the ball away all the time now. But yeah, Dennis Serkin's got a ratio of yellow card 1 in every 4 games, and Chris Macon was actually 1 in 7, which actually surprised me when I was looking into it. But let's get into the last bottom 5. Bomber, we need your countdown from 10 up to 6, please.
Yeah, I'm kind of dreading this now, but okay. So my number 10 would be Chris Macon. Number 9, Danny Rose. Number 8, Dennis Serkin.
You all right?
Number 7, Marcus Alonso. Number 6, George McCartney.
What?
Right.
There is reason.
Yeah. No,
I knew this was going to happen. There is a reason.
I'm gonna come back to Chris Macon being in 10th because we're going to wait until the other lads have mentioned them.
Right.
And the same for Danny Rose.
I think I can talk after that.
But you did have Marco Alonso in 7th, and he's also in 7th in Gav's list as well. Now, I remember him being a good player, an okay player. I mean, honestly, with his time, I'd almost put him in the same bracket as George McCartney in a way, and that's not a disparaging thing. But I didn't expect him to go on to seal the big moves to the Chelseas and end up being at Barcelona like he did, because I almost think he kicked on after he was with us. I mean, could you see that when he was with us, Bomber?
No, absolutely not. It came as a surprise to me, kind of the meteoric rise he had afterwards. And that's kind of why I think I've got him down in 7th, because although he is he's one of the best fullbacks at the time. He was not at the time at Sunderland, but he went on to be one of the best fullbacks in the Premier League, if not in the world. And I was very, very careful to try and separate the Marcus Alonso Premier League world beater fullback at Chelsea versus the Marcus Alonso that did do very, very well. Don't get me wrong. He had a big impact for us in such a short period of time, and was obviously crucial in that Great Escape season. But he wasn't long enough, and he wasn't the developed fullback that Chelsea benefited from, which is why, although undoubtedly, probably technically, and in terms of the career he's had, would probably be number one on this list if that was the metric. But for me, it wasn't the fully fledged Marcos Alonso. And whilst he had a massive impact and was, like I say, a part of that Great Escape team, his stay was a very short one, which is why he's in 7th and not higher.
Yeah, I mean, Gav, exactly the same for you. You have him in 7th as well. Made 20 appearances, as Bombers touched on. He part of that Great Escape team, went to the League Cup final that season. So he was all part of that. I think he was man of the match against Manchester United in the semi-final, if I remember rightly. Another bizarre thing about Marcos Alonso, we're talking about yellow cards and ratios and things. He was by far the kind of highest ratio of yellow cards. He got 7 yellow cards in 20 games, which I couldn't believe when I didn't think he made a tackle, to be honest, when he was with Sunderland, but it's like he did. But you remember him as being a cultured player, left footer on that left hand side, Gav. But again, did you see it? Because you've got him down in 7th. I don't know whether that's games or whether you are just purely on talent or what, like Bombers just described. But I have to admit, I thought he was good. I thought he's a nice player, but I just not sure I saw it.
I did I thought he was brilliant, and I was gutted we didn't sign him because we could have. It wasn't like at the time he wasn't playing loads for Fiorentina, and I'm pretty sure the club had an agreement there they could have taken up on. And typical Sunderland, there's our phrase again. We didn't do it. He has a couple of good years with Fiorentina and gets a big money move to Chelsea, and the rest is history. But no, I definitely saw it. I thought he was brilliant. I didn't think when we signed him that we were signing a world beater or anything, because nobody really knew much about him. We knew he'd had a few years at Bolton. He went on to Fiorentina and I think he'd been playing on the left of a back three. I don't even think he'd been playing fullback.
He was struggling at Fiorentina until we signed him, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I think he played in a back three with Micah Richards, of all people, for a season. But yeah, when he came to us, I thought he was outstanding, and I was just gutted we never signed him. And again, just one of the most stupid things the club's ever done is not take up that option to buy him. Because had we done that, we would have made a lot of money on him. Because he then went on to do what he's done in his career. And he hasn't played many games for his country, which I would probably say from his perspective is probably a disappointment. Largely because of the competition for places and things like that. But I mean, his rap sheet since leaving Sunderland's unbelievable. I mean, he won everything with Chelsea. He won a Premier League. He won 4 FA Cups, I think, or at least played in 5 finals of the FA Cup. I don't know, I'm reading that stat. Won the Champions League, won the Europa League, won the Super Cup, won the Club World Cup, won the La Liga with Barcelona, won the Super Cup with Barcelona. And got into the Premier League Team of the Year in 2017-18.
But Gav, if you're saying you saw that, what has him in 7th then?
I mean, I'm not going to give away my picks above him. I mean, I can give away one, which was Phil Bardsley, because I've already mentioned him. But I'm not just taking into account, the potential of the player, the quality of the player. It's what they mean to me, what they meant to the fan base, what they did for the club. He wasn't here long enough. I think I said that about a couple of people before we settled on the top 10. Some of them just weren't here long enough to justify putting them further up the list. But I would say of all the players who had a short stint here, or one, he was right up there. And the only reason he doesn't place higher is because, some of those names above him just did an unbelievable job over a longer period. But he was an outstanding player for us. I think if you went back and watched some of those games in that Great Escape season, he was absolutely brilliant for us towards the back end of the season in that cup run. And I think that's really what put him on the map as a footballer. I think people took notice of Marcos Alonso after his spell with Sunderland because he showed that he was not only a Premier League player, but a top operator in the Premier League.
Yeah. And you mentioned actually his international caps. He didn't get his first one until he was 28, which I think is one of the he didn't get up that many. Right. Jonny, before I get your say on Alonso, we need to have more background. So could you provide your top 5, starting with 5 up to your top pick, please?
Yeah, here we go then. 5, Phil Bardsley. 4, Chris Macon. 3, Danny Rose. 2, Marcos Alonso. And number 1, Mickey Gray.
Right. So that provides a bit of context on Marcos Alonso. He's second in your list, only behind Mickey Gray. 16 league appearances, 20 in total. So you saying that in those 20 appearances, he impressed you that much that he's the second best Sunderland fullback of the last 25 to 30 years.
Just remember, I did put John Mensah top of the list of centre halves, and I don't even think he played a full season's worth of games. So, if nothing else, I'm consistent. All right, I might be consistently shit, but I'm consistent.
The floor is yours, Johnny.
Yeah, I think. I mean, Gav's kind of already half made the point. Really, I think. Yes, it was a short spell, but in that spell, I thought he was absolutely brilliant. I'm not going to try and pretend that I was predicting he'd go on to win the Premier League and win the Champions League and what have you.
I'd be more impressed with this explanation if you did.
Yeah, no, sorry. At the time, I wrote out in detail his career path. But no, I think, I thought anyway at the time that we could see he was a top-class player. And like Gav, I was absolutely gutted when we didn't sign him permanently at the end of the season. Because there was lots of talk that it was an option and that we could have pursued it and the player would have fancied it. Kind of classic Sunderland end of loan spell, really, or whatever. Like the same with Jan and Villa, where everybody was like, "Oh, just makes sense, just do it." But no, Sunderland have to be different. I just thought Alonso was class. He was a very classy player as well. Touching back on the whole cultured left foot versus big bruiser on the right hand side, I thought Alonso sort of fit very neatly into that sort of that category of stylish and cultured left backs. I can't remember the player now, but against the Mags at St James's in the 3-0, can't remember who it was he beat, but there was one moment where Alonso does just like a little drag back and go and just totally skins somebody on the left hand side and just glides past them. And that moment always kind of stuck out to me as summing Alonso up as a player. Understated, elegant, graceful, could make you look like a fool without almost seeming like he was trying at times. He almost had, in the most diluted sense, he almost reminded me a little bit of the way Berbatov used to be very languid up front. Alonso never seemed like he was about to run through brick walls or, like he was going to be coming off the pitch with the shirt sticking to him like a second skin. But he was just reading of the game, touch, quality on the ball. I thought he had nearly every aspect you can have as a fullback, really, barring explosive pace was kind of the only thing he didn't have. So yeah, for me, he impressed me enough in those games that he did play that I think, because I've included some players in my top 5. Obviously, Mickey Gray makes number 1 and Macon makes number 4, where the sheer number of games and the quality that they were for the whole spell, has to get them in there. But I think if we're going in terms of talent and ability, for me, Alonso is right up there. And yeah, that's why I've got him second. And Bomber having George McCartney ahead of Marcus Alonso, man, I'm not sure about that. Yeah. I don't know if I can let that one go.
Well, like you said, Johnny, you didn't think Alonso ran through brick walls. 20 games, like I said, 7 yellow cards and 1 red card in 20 games, which is a pretty impressive record. But there you go. I mean, look, he gets the second best for you. He gets the second best fullback for Sunderland over the last 28 years because of a drag back against the Mags. But at that point, we can move on. Gav, I think we've mentioned a couple of them. We need your countdown from 5 up to your top fullback, please.
Okay. Number 5, I have Danny Rose. Number 4, Chris Macon. Number 3, Julio Walker. Number 2, Trey Hume. And at number 1, I have Mickey Gray.
Right. Yes. So it's really difficult to know which order to do these in because the spread is just ridiculous. But we'll go Phil Bardsley because he just missed out on your top 5 and he just squeaked into Johnny's. We'll find out from Bomber in a moment where he ends up on his. He had moments. We'll see. He had moments off the pitch, of course. And do you think sometimes that overshadows what he did on the pitch, Gav?
Well, it did at the time, so you can't ignore it. He got dropped completely out of the squad by Paulo Di Canio, didn't he? But I think that was more about when you hear all these stories from people who played for Di Canio at the time. It was a power play. He was just trying to assert some dominance. He knew who the big characters were in the dressing room and who he had to upset to try and assert himself, and that meant pissing off the likes of Bardsley. Look, you say about some of the off-field stuff. There's obviously that picture, isn't there, where he was lying on the casino floor with notes scattered around him, and it's just people having a daft laugh. I think Phil Bardsley, to be honest, is a pretty normal bloke from a normal background who played football in the way that most of us would have liked to if we'd had the chance. Just a very relatable person, and that means sometimes he did things off the pitch which I wouldn't say were controversial. I would just say it was him being a normal lad, cracking on with his mates. And that when you're in the spotlight and you're in the Premier League, it's possibly something that you can't get away with. But he did well on my list, and I think we're talking about sixth place. That's still a good position to take up, because I think he was a committed footballer. He had some important performances. The one that immediately comes to mind for some reason is that goal against Man City, where he was playing left back and he cut inside and bent it in. We won 1-0. And obviously he had a rocket of a right foot on him as well. There's that goal against West Brom.
The semi-final goal wasn't exactly a rocket, but it was a big one.
No, but it was
turned David De Gea's wrists into poppadoms.
Yeah. But he was capable of a rocket or two as well. There was that one where it got laid up to him against West Brom and he just battered it in the top corner. So, I do like a full-back who can occasionally stick their foot through it and score a goal. But then there were other moments where you would get really annoyed by him just not being technically good enough. Like there was times where he would come up against like a really quality Premier League winger and they would just tie him in knots. And he was like, is he good enough or not? But you think about when he first came to the club, we were like just struggling a little bit there to try and establish ourselves and try and stay up. And then it was bringing in him and Johnny Evans in January made a huge, huge difference to us. And I think were the reason we stayed up, to be honest. Evans gets all the credit, but Bardsley was just as important because they just solidified that defence for us. So yeah, and I think if you speak to 1,000 Sunderland fans, 999 of them would have good things to say about Phil Bardsley. I think as time's moved on, he's been away from the club a long time now. I think he's probably viewed as somebody who was very important to us, and again, stuck it out. Was here for a long time. He had a good stint with Sunderland, and yeah, I think sixth place is about right. I think when you heard me other names there, I just think they all had a bit more quality or contributed a little bit more in terms of the overall picture of the football club at the time they were there. But Bardsley, for me, did very well for Sunderland.
And you haven't even mentioned his best moment in the public consciousness, which was knocking Wayne Rooney out in a random kitchen at like 2 o'clock in the morning and getting that leaked into papers. That was Bardo on it. So, main right hook and all.
Well, when we're getting to Mickey Gray, we can talk about he's scrapping a restaurant with Wayne Rooney if you want. But in terms of Phil Bardsley, you had him roughly about the same. You had him fifth. Gav had him sixth. We'll get into Bombers ranking in a minute. But you talk about 6 years, signed him for about 2 million, 200 appearances, 11 goals, actually. I was surprised he scored that many in the end, even though Gav was saying he did have a shot on him. But I was actually surprised that, in fact, that he only got 13 Scotland caps because he played at the top level for so many years. But just one of these players, and again, I think we touched on it at the beginning, Johnny, that as a right back, just a solid, dependable, you knew he was there. He was never going to do out flash. He was never going to bomb on and take a couple of players on. We're talking about the culture players on the left, but he was just one of these traditional fullbacks who you just knew would give his all, wouldn't get done, and it wouldn't get done too many times, or he'd kick the player into the sidelines. But yeah, just almost like a Mr. Dependable.
Very much so. Yeah, Mr. Dependable absolutely covers it. Versatile as well. He was basically equally comfortable playing left back and right back. Obviously, right back was sort of his actual position, but I haven't crunched the numbers. But I bet if you went back and actually looked at how many games he did play on either side, it's probably a lot closer than you might think. Which is to his credit as well. And he made a massive number of appearances for the club in the Premier League over the time that he was here. Definitely good value for money as well, like you said, with the transfer fee. He was obviously, he had the stuff off the pitch, the casino picture and what have you, but I think he was actually very resilient to be able to bounce back from that. Obviously he was frozen out by Di Canio and there was all that palaver at the start of the 13-14 season where, it's kind of the whole club seemed to be in a bit of a mini implosion at the time.
Protest to have ketchup.
Well, yeah, exactly. Ketchup protests and, players going and trying to get the manager sacked at the board. Well, not trying, getting the manager sacked. So the whole place was chaotic. And I think for Bardsley to have come back like he did from that, he returned to he came back into the fold, returned into the team, and he continued to be a good servant for us. So, yeah, I think he's one of those where he makes his way into my top 5 more of the strength of his overall kind of Sunderland career rather than his pure natural ability, because I think he's one of those footballers who, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but made the absolute most out of the talent that he was given and turned that into as good a career as he possibly could, and I think, yeah, I mean, as well, you've got to think with him and Alonso to a degree, but certainly Bardsley, he was 45 minutes away from potentially being, one of the only Sunderland players in the last 70 years to win a major trophy. We were 1-0 up at half-time in that cup final against Man City. So we talk about some of these players about like, oh yeah, well, they made so many appearances and they did this, but actually, Bardsley was part of a team that got as close to glory as any Sunderland team has in a long, long time. So I think that, again, speaks volumes to the esteem to which I think he deserves to be held by the fans. And I think a player whose reputation's probably increased in the time since he's been gone, really. But again, make this list in a year's time and Trey Hume might be making a pretty strong case to be ahead of him in my list.
Yeah, well, I was so desperate for you to use bounce back ability during that monologue, but you didn't. You were right on the edge of it as well. I thought he's going to use it now, and you just bottled out. But yeah, Bomber, before I bring you in on Phil Bardsley, we need a bit of context. So, can we have your top five up to your top pick, please?
Here we go.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
People have seen who you've missed out. People have seen who you've missed out on the bottom 5, and we're desperate to know where they are.
Well, I said I've got 10 hills I'm going to stand on, Chris, and these are the last 5. So
let's go. Get your popcorn, get your seatbelts on, lads.
Number 5, Mickey Gray.
Right.
Number 4, Julio Arca. Number 3, Trey Hume. That leaves. Number 2, Phil Bardsley. Number 1, Patrick Van Arnold.
Oh, fuck off. No. You're having a laugh, aren't you?
Right.
I'll see you later, lads. I'm just going to make a call.
Is PVA going to be my John Mensah?
The greatest.
Whoa, do not put that on the same level as John Mensah. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Hang on.
We need
the greatest fullback of the last 30 years or so is I'm not having that.
No. That's
Anyways,
not what I said. That's not the topic, Gav. It's not the greatest fullback. It's my top 10 fullbacks.
He's gonna have his chance to explain Patrick Van Arnold, but for now, Phil Bardsley, because he's number 2. So again, kind of the second best fullback in the Sunderland strip in the last 25 to 30 years for you.
Oh, don't make it sound more dramatic than it is.
I don't know. That's fact, Bomber. But what has him ahead of the likes of, you're talking about Julio Arca from a cultured side, or Chris Macon from the opposite side of it? I mean, what has Patrick Van Arnold? Phil Bardsley. I'm already jumping ahead. What has Phil Bardsley? Because you can argue Chris Macon, very similar to Phil Bardsley.
Yeah.
Arguably more successful in terms of where he kind of helped Sunderland.
So there's a few clarifications here. So Chris Macon is very unlucky. He's 10th in my list because he's kind of just almost out of my era and my scope when it comes to following Sunderland. So that's the only reason, and that's the reason why a couple of others didn't make or wouldn't have made my top 10 of the ones that missed out. Phil Bardsley, just to come back to him, hearing Gav and Jonny speak about Phil Bardsley almost justified my decision, I feel, because they both talked about him in such high regard, and yet they've put him, was it 6th? Both of you put him 6th? Or certainly not in the top 3. So I'm listening to both of you going, yeah, that's exactly why I've put him 2nd. He spanned across 6 years or 7 seasons, he was a mainstay of the Sunderland team across Roy Keane, Steve Bruce, Martin O'Neill, Gus Poyet right at the end, forgetting the kind of the fallout with Paolo Di Canio. If you think about those managers and those tenures and what we went through in those the highs and lows across all of those eras, shall we say, a mainstay of that, and one of the only mainstays of that was Phil Bardsley. He's synonymous for me anyway. I know it's a little bit, he came a little bit later, but he's synonymous for me with Roy Keane, and with more so with Martin O'Neill. I don't know why kind of Steve Bruce in the middle has kind of been forgotten in my mind. But he was the heartbeat of that Sunderland defence, or the Mr. Consistency, combative. We talked right at the start about how we want our right backs to be combative, to be throwing themselves around, to be physically kind of willing to put their body on the line. And like Jonny said, he wasn't the most technically gifted footballer in the world, but he was all of those other things that we want in a right back. I've not taken into account any of the off the field stuff because for me it affects them as a human being, but it doesn't affect whether or not they're a good right back or left back for me. So I've kind of forgone all of that. He scored against United in the League Cup final, which gives him some extra brownie points for me. He was one of he's won Player of the Season awards with us. Nearly 200, if not 200 appearances for the club. Like I said, across multiple seasons, multiple managers, all of those managers who, Martin O'Neill, Steve Bruce, whether we like them or hate them, they are established, historic, kind of legendary managers in certainly in the Premier League era. And they all trusted Phil Bardsley to sit right back for them. So I think he certainly deserves a place in the top 3. We can debate whether it's third, second, probably not first, because that's Patrick Van Aanholt. But
you are definitely dying on the Phil Bardsley hill. So look, we've got to stick with you, Bomber, to be honest. Because let's move on to Patrick Van Aanholt. We've got to really. We can't go elsewhere and come back.
Okay.
You have Patrick Van Aanholt as the best Sunderland fullback of the last 28 years. So the floor's yours, basically.
So number 1 would be Julio Arca, because Julio Arca was my first Sunderland love. Like I say, as a left-sided player myself, who played left back, who played left midfield, Julio Arca was my first love as a Sunderland fan. And if it wasn't for the fact that he probably played more at left midfield than he did at left back, he would be my number 1. So I will caveat that with that. However, Patrick Van Aanholt was the modern day fullback before it was fashionable to be that type of fullback. I think in terms of his attacking threat, the match winning moments that he had for us. Okay, he wasn't the best defender in the world, but the impact that he had, and anything that ended up in something good on an individual game, probably came down that left-hand side and probably came from Patrick Van Aanholt during his time at the club. I think back to some of the goals that he scored. He didn't score loads of goals, but some of the goals he scored changed games. He was an attacking threat and a positive player in a team that was always fighting relegation. And I think not just him, but him and a couple of others are the reason why we didn't go down sooner. I just think I look at that list and I think technically as a footballer, he was, again, Julio aside, he was probably the most exciting. He was the most attacking. I think he was probably the most technically gifted. And everything else that goes around it, I've kind of forgone in terms of who he played for, the seasons we had, the fact that the seasons weren't particularly successful, although staying up, in itself is a success.
Well, just on that, Bomber, actually, because it's interesting. I was just looking there. As your top 2, you've picked the 2 players who have got by far the lowest win percentage while they're playing. So we've got Patrick Van Aanholt, 38% win percentage. Mm-hmm. You've got Phil Bardsley, 39%. And then the next one, you've got to go to Danny Rose at 46%, who played in a really crap season, but he's ahead of Phil Bardsley and Patrick Van Aanholt. And it's strange that you've picked your top 2 who won the fewest games out of.
I think that's testament to the impact they had on on me and on the team overall. It's not necessary. Well, it is about wins because better players play in better teams that win more games, and I get that argument. But if you think back to those seasons, how long was he with us? 3 years, 4 years, and they weren't great seasons. But he, in each of those seasons, I would argue was one of the positives and one of the shining lights of those seasons. I think back to some of the goals and assists that he had, and like I said, they weren't numerous because we weren't winning many games. But I always remember watching Patrick Van Aanholt and being excited about what could possibly happen in the final third of the pitch, let's say.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because actually Gav was saying that there's a sound of a reversing truck in the background on my
It's not me. It's not me.
Gav, look, Patrick Van Aanholt, Bomber has him top. You and Jonny have him in 9th. Now, my memories of Patrick Van Aanholt, and I think he signed for Buttons, I think 1.5 million or something from Chelsea. 95 games in the end, 8 goals, which wasn't, I think it was only second behind Julio Arca, I think, in terms of goals per game. But my memories are that it was Sam Allardyce who turned him into a player, and before that, he was a bit naff. That's my memory.
I would agree with that. I can always remember the one of the frequent criticisms of Van Aanholt was that he just was languid, would switch off. I think Bomber highlighted quite a lot of things there which were true. I think from an attacking sense, he was really, really good. For a fullback, technically very good, got forward well. I think that's where he enjoyed playing. I think if Patrick Van Aanholt had came along 10 years earlier, he'd have been a winger, wouldn't he? He wouldn't have been a fullback. But it was defensively where he wasn't particularly great. And yeah, there were more. There were assists for Defoe's goals in that period, which he did pretty well. Obviously, he scored that free kick against Everton in the game where we sent the Mags down and we stayed up. So there are moments where he stands out. And actually, as well, he is one of a very small handful of players who, in that period, we bought for next to out and sold on for a lot of money. I think we sold him for 14 million to Palace.
Yeah, unbelievable, by the way.
Yeah, we absolutely had their pants down with that deal.
Yeah.
But I had him in 9th, and that's because I just don't think as a fullback he was as outstanding as some of the others. I think if you judged him on his all round game, he wasn't a defender at all. He didn't defend. He needed somebody in front of him who could do his running for him, and who would sit back and track back because.
Well, he needed someone behind him, really, rather than in front of him.
Well, yeah, because he would maraud forward, end up on the left wing, and then he would just jog back and leave a massive gap in the left back position. He was, like I say, I think actually he was probably more of a winger. But if you look at his career, he's left us. Palace, he was relatively safe in their team over a 5-year period. Did very well. Went to Galatasaray, was first choice for 1 season. Then he's sort of moved on a bit, went to PSV Eindhoven, now he's at Sparta Rotterdam, and he's 33, 34, something like that now. So he's had a good career, Patrick Van Aanholt, but I just think if we're just judging him solely on his time with Sunderland, I just think there were always question marks over his defensive ability. And if we're talking about fullbacks, they've got to be able to defend a little bit at least, especially if you're going to make it into the top 5. You've got to be more of an all rounder than what Van Aanholt probably was.
Yeah, I mean, Jonny, Patrick Van Aanholt, your memories are yours similar to Gav's or similar to? Well, you've got him in 9th, so
it came away slightly, I think.
Yeah, I just had to kind of get that in there, but at the end, as I said, when Sam Allardyce came in, I think Bombers touched on it that actually he was almost behind every attack. I think after that point when Allardyce just went, I've got something here on that left-hand side to get us going. And he did. Every single time it came through Van Aanholt, it came from him down that left. We only had one side, I think, at that point. But for me, it took Sam Allardyce to turn him into a player.
Yeah, and I think if this list was like top 10 most impactful players on a team, I think Van Aanholt's got a good shout of being high up that list, because I do agree with what Bomber was saying about the fact that, Van Aanholt basically had an outsized impact, I think, on the team in a good way compared to his actual ability levels. And part of that's due to the fact that the team he was playing in generally was a poor team. We were we were circling the plug hole for a few seasons before we finally went under Moyes in that 16-17 season. But Van Aanholt was generally the bright spot in that team. And if we got positive results, it was usually because he was, making a run in behind and cutting the ball back for somebody, or, just using his pace to make a big impact. But having said that, if he didn't have pace, I think he'd have struggled to make it past the Championship. To be honest, in terms of ability, just pure natural talent, yes, he was a good player, but he couldn't defend. I'm sorry, it seems harsh. I don't want to say it, but he was a rubbish actual defender. He wasn't very good 1-versus-1. He had no positional sense because he spent all of his time sprinting.
Whoa. He's on our top 10, Johnny. Bloody hell. He's a decent player.
He was so good going forward for a fullback that it did almost make up for it, but he wasn't a defender. Like Gav said, if he'd come through 10 years earlier, he'd have been a winger. Even the time he did come through, I think you could have made a very good argument for shifting him up the pitch. So I just don't think in a list of fullbacks that he's good enough defensively to make it any higher than 9th. He was a good player and I liked him, but he wasn't a defender.
Yeah. But do you know as well, by the way, when you think about it, we had him on one side and we had DeAndre Yedlin on the other. And it really is testament to Lamine Koné and Yunus Kabul and their ability, and Yann Villa sat in front of them, their ability to screen and protect, because the pair of them didn't want to defend.
It is no wonder that Allardyce tried a back three, really, isn't it?
Yeah. In another life, right, Van Aanholt, if he'd played in a back 3, back 5 and he'd been a wing back the whole time, he might be number 1 in my list, because I think he would have been almost perfectly suited to that sort of role. But in the world where he was in a back 4, I just think defensively, yeah.
So I'm looking down my top 5 now, and what I can see from it is I think I'm basing this, and I'm not going to change my order. Like I said, Julio would be number 1 if he'd played more games at left back than left midfield. Say my first love, but I'm looking at this list, and that top 5 is how, I guess it's a list of how players have made me feel as a Sunderland fan, and my own kind of affinity towards them. Because I'm fully aware that I'm contradicting myself by saying Patrick Van Aanholt's number 1 because of his ability going forward, etc., etc. And then I'm putting Phil Bardsley number 2 for almost like the counter opposite reasons. So it looks like my list is neither the hardest battlers or the most flair and most technically gifted. It's kind of a mishmash between. But I'm looking at the top 5 versus the bottom 5, and that top 5 is a very clear list of how players have made me feel as a Sunderland fan. So that's the caveat that I'll roll off the hill on.
Yeah, I really, genuinely, when I put this list out, didn't expect to spend so much time on Patrick Van Aanholt, but we have, so we'll move on. Gav, Trey Hume, he's second in your list. The debate earlier on was about Premier League experience, which there's only Dennis Sergen who hasn't played in the Premier League. He dropped down to 8th, Dennis Sergen. Trey Hume gets second spot. I mean, is this, again, are you jumping into the Bomber kind of territory where you're saying he's my favourite player and I'm having him up there?
No, because if you remember when we did the Player of the Year pod, I didn't vote for Trey Hume. I went with Luke O'Nien, didn't I?
But you like Luke O'Nien more than Trey Hume, so
yeah. And by the way, there's someone else who had a good season at right back for us who we didn't mention on this list because he's obviously went on to be a centre half.
Just I'm winning everything, then we'll back it up.
No, I have Trey Hume in second, and it's because when I was looking at the list and trying to work out a bit like what Bomber did, sort of the impact these players have had on us, I was comparing, because we're in the moment, right, with Hume and Serkin, so I was comparing them now to players when they were here in the moment. And like Hume for me, I loved Julio Arca, like Bomber said, Julio was one of my heroes when I was a kid. But I think as a fullback, Hume is a better defender than Julio. So that's why I put him ahead of him. I think Hume's all-round game has really come on. I think he's a goal threat. His crossing ability, I've said it before on these podcasts, it's up there with Summerby. Is some of the best crosses from the right-hand side I've seen from a Sunderland player. I put him ahead of Chris Macon because I just think he's a better attacking player than Chris Macon. And Macon's best season for us was that promotion season, I think. So Hume's best season for Sunderland was a promotion season. And if I put them side by side, I think Hume's done more than Chris Macon did in that. promotion campaign, so that's why I've got him ahead of him. I think he's more of an all-rounder than Bardsley. I think he's a better defender than Danny Rose. I think he's had a longer stint and had more of an impact than Marcus Alonso. I think his durability puts him way ahead of Dennis Cirkin. Obviously, we've just talked about Van Aanholt and George McCartney bottomed my list. So Trey Hume is right up there, and justifiably so. I think there's a reason he's kicked on as much, and there's a reason. If you look at this Sunderland team now that we've got as we speak, ignoring the lads we've just signed over the summer, because obviously we don't know anything about them, he's the most Premier League ready player in that team, in my opinion. I think he would. If you said to me tomorrow, Chelsea or Tottenham or Man United or Aston Villa wanted to sign Trey Hume, I'd be like, hey, well, I can totally understand it. I think he's that good. And I think he's just demonstrated so much. We've seen him go from a kid who came in from the Northern Irish Premier League, who was a bit out of his depth at first and needed time to settle in a very short space of time, has shown himself to be one of the best fullbacks, I think, in the country. And I genuinely mean that. I think if you will see next season how good he is, because when you put him into the Premier League, he's gonna just slot in like he's been there forever. And I think the big part of that's been how well he's done at international level. Northern Ireland, he's captain of his country and never played a game in the top flight. And it's because when he comes up against these top players, he fares very well. So Trey, but as a Sunderland player, that's all we're judging them on. I just think he's an all-rounder. He's got that. When I said at the start about left backs traditionally being more attacking at Sunderland and then the full back being the hard man, he's both, isn't he? Because he's one of the hardest little bastards we've ever had. He loves getting stuck in, but then he pops up with some really good goals. Like I say, he's adding assists. His crossing ability is right up there with some of the best I've seen in a Sunderland shirt. And I think as an all-round full-back, he's pretty much there or thereabouts as one of the best we've had.
Yeah. So if he doesn't slot into the Premier League, it's all your fault, Gav, after saying that.
Yeah.
Johnny, you had him in his lowest position of 7th. What's he lacking not to make your top 5?
Yeah, to be honest, this is just a bit of an arbitrary rule that I've kind of imposed on myself. But I just thought if you haven't actually played in the Premier League, not just for Sunderland, but ever, I struggle to put him above many players who have. And it's a bit silly in a way, because by that logic, almost, after Hume's played one game at the start of the new season, I could easily stick him like 3rd, because I think
you'd have Danny Graham ahead of Mayenda.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, so there's definitely limited. And just for the record, I would never put Danny Graham ahead of Mayenda under any circumstances.
Gav's taken 10 seconds to completely dismantle your logic.
No, hey, look, no, I'm fully aware that there's limitations to it, but I think it's so hard as it is to quantify how you should value each different aspect. So ability versus number of appearances versus win ratios and all that. Like, on any given day, I think each of us could have easily picked a different list of 10 with everybody in a different position and probably justified it. But yeah, for me, I think you have to have at least done it for a bit in the Premier League for Sunderland to crack the top 5. So yeah, I mean, come the end of this season, Trey Hume could and very likely will be in me top 5, if not me top 3. Because I agree with nearly everything Gav said. I think he's brilliant. I think he's got a brilliant mix of going forward and defensively, in terms of being a bit of an all-rounder. But just, yeah, he has to just prove himself at that top level. And once he's done that, then, the sky's the limit for him, really.
Well, at least, you're consistent with that, Johnny. Bomber.
I knew that was coming.
You said Dennis Cirkin was 8th because he hasn't played in the Premier League. Trey Hume finishes 3rd on your list. So
yes.
What propels him all the way up over Dennis Cirkin when you said the Premier League football was the problem with Cirkin?
So first off, I'm fully aware of the contradiction. I said that it was kind of a precursor to it. And the reasons why Cirkin is in 8th should mean that Hume doesn't make that top 5. But like I said right at the start, when I'm compiling my list, I'm trying to think of...
You're thinking of a tackle, aren't you, at Wembley? Basically?
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking of putting Bembra and Diaz out of the game.
Yeah.
But, like I said, I'm thinking of ability, of how they make me feel. And their impact on the team, their impact on the fan base. And I would say at this very moment in time, I wouldn't say there's a more popular player in a Sunderland shirt than Trey Hume currently.
Yeah. To be fair, when you go through this list of fullbacks, how many have got the individual moments? Like with Trey Hume, you could say, the goals that he scored. You could say the tackle in Wembley. You could say the tackle James McLean. He's got moments where actually a lot of the others are lacking them.
Yeah, absolutely. You can single out a number, like I say, of tackles, of crosses, of goals, of assists of Trey Hume pretty easily, and you might struggle for some of the others, but I just think Trey Hume is in such a relatively short period of time has had such a meteoric rise in terms of just what he looked like in that first game or in that first couple of games to what he is now. I'm not bothered that he hasn't made a Premier League appearance yet, because he's a fully fledged international and an international captain. So that kind of, whereas Dennis Sirkin obviously hasn't played not senior international football, hasn't played in the Premier League. So almost that experience or inexperience of having not played Premier League football is overruled by, he's a fully fledged integral part of that Northern Ireland team. So that trumps it for me. I love Trey Hume. The whole fan base loves Trey Hume. He's had such a positive influence, not just on the team, but on our success over the last couple of seasons. And, like Johnny said, if we were to do this list again this time next year, he may even usurp Patrick Van Arnold at the top of the list.
Oh, wow. That's a statement.
Large claims.
That's a real statement. I mean, there's so much to unpick in that statement. I don't know. I think I'm just going to leave it there hanging, to be honest, because we're going to go to Johnny, because we're going to go on to Julio Arca. You have him in his lowest position of 6th, Johnny. There was some debate flying around. How much did he play left back? How much did he play left midfield? But he did make the list. Did that debate muddy the waters? Because you've put him down in 6th, but I think back and I think that was his best position.
Yeah, quite possibly. I just think, the spread of positions didn't help him in this list, just in the sense that if you're trying to evaluate purely as fullbacks, then it almost hurts players, I think, to be that versatile. I mean, I know I said versatility for Bardsley was a strength, but that's because he was playing the two different types of fullback, left and right. So he's always still in this conversation. Whereas I think for Arca, he did obviously play on, I was going to say the left wing, but it was more sort of left midfield in a 4-4-2, wasn't it? Or he'd play centrally occasionally. Which, just for me, it is strange for that to hurt him, but it does. I just think when you're thinking purely of a fullback, I want somebody who's a little bit more specialised, and a little bit more naturalised, possibly. And look, everybody loves Julio, all Sunderland fans. We all know he's absolutely brilliant, lovely footballer, great left foot, scored some great goals. He was a really, really talented footballer. That goes without saying. But if I was picking a team to win a cup final, or certainly if I was picking a team to keep a clean sheet to save me life, I wouldn't be putting Julio Arca in it. And I think that's why he just doesn't quite crack the top 5. Again, though, I think if you'd asked us on another day, I could easily see a world where Julio makes the top 5 or maybe the top 4 or something, because, the higher up this list you get, the gaps between the players shrink. The gap between sort of 10th and 6th is a hell of a lot bigger than probably even the gap between sort of 4th and 3rd.
I'd say it depends who you've got top, Johnny, to be honest.
Well, it depends. It depends if you've got somebody who doesn't know how to defend top of your list, or.
But we've done top defenders.
No, but I think again to sympathise with Bomber's list as well. I think he makes
sympathise with his list.
Thank you, Johnny.
Just to extend an olive branch, but I agree with his point about the fact that when players have got moments or things that made you feel a certain way, that it's easy to bump them higher up the list. And I think for me, there are Sunderland players who are more synonymous with being a fullback to me, and that's probably just where my slight bias in this one comes from, because there are some players who I think of a left back, I don't immediately think of Julio, but I would immediately think of Danny Rose or Marcus Alonso or Mickey Gray, just because they were more specialised. So yeah, it's more a question of role for me than ability with Julio.
Yeah, I mean, Gav, he makes your top three behind Mickey Gray and Trey Hume. I think if he'd been our fullback long term, would have been talking about certainly in one of the two top spots. But he could put his foot in, he could take someone on, he could meg someone, he could score a free kick, he could stick a cross in on someone's head. I mean, for me, there wasn't much Julio couldn't do.
He was mint. I mean, even later in his career when he was playing for South Shields, he was playing as a hold midfield player where he didn't even have to run. He was just spraying the ball around, playing Northern League, which still amazes me. I mean, even before that, he was playing for the Willow Pond in the Sunday Morning League, wasn't he? I mean, can you imagine that, coming up against Julio Arca and
I'd just stand and watch him. I wouldn't want to tackle him.
I know. And well, you wouldn't be daft enough to try and tackle him, would you? He'd just make you look silly. But no, he could do absolutely everything, as you said, and he was a really important player at a time when we didn't have much quality. Like, I always remember, I think one of the reasons he's still one of my heroes, Julio, is because, like, and we've done a lot of looking back this summer, doing these podcasts and doing these top tens and things. And I remember doing me research around the strikers one that we did, and we had players throwing in transfer requests, people who we still look back on them fondly now. But at the time, actually, they were keen to get away from Sunderland, and they couldn't wait to disappear. Julio stuck about; he was still here, and I'm a little bit gutted that he actually missed out on the Keane season because he left us for Borough. He didn't, he gave us that extra chance. He stayed around after the 19-point relegation. He got promoted with us, played in the 15-point season, and then got a move to Middlesbrough, back to the Premier League. And I just think, imagine if he'd been in that team, when we had Roy Keane in charge. I mean, because he deserved a proper. Because then Julio would have probably played another 3-4 years for Sunderland and would have played in the Premier League, and would have been even more of a legend in people's eyes. But the only reason he wasn't in my top two was because he played a lot of football in left midfield and in other positions. Obviously, he did have a great stint at left back, and that's why he's so high up on the list. And he was absolutely outstanding, wasn't he? He just had so much ability. You can hardly believe It's a weird story, Julio's, isn't it? Because you hear him. I've been to talkings where he's done podcasts in the past with us. When he talked about when he arrived at Sunderland, and he literally, there was none of this what there is now, where the club are employing interpreters and they've got people doing all the liaison for them, making sure they're settled in and comfortable, and we even have other people in the squad who can speak the same language to keep them right. Julio was just 18, 19-year-old transported from Buenos Aires into Sunderland, and he had Bobby Saxton shouting "fuck" every other word at him, and he talks about that and says, I learned English very quickly by just listening to them swear. But like that,
if it wasn't for Emerson Thome at the time,
yes, Emerson Thome did a lot for him. But it's mad that when you think about how difficult that must have been for such a young person, the fact that he went on to do what he did, unbelievable. And I think Julio Arca will be, if you asked most Sunderland fans for their top 10, I think he'd be right up there in most people's lists, because he's had a lasting impact on us, hasn't he? He wasn't your typical Argentinian footballer in that, you don't associate him necessarily with being fancy and dribbling around people, although he could do it. I would associate Julio with being, more of the typical Sunderland player who could put their foot in and gave their all, and he did have that bit of flair. I mean, I don't know if he was even playing left back that day, but I always think about that goal against Bradford when he ran the length of the pitch and dinked it over the goalkeeper. It's a shame there's not better footage of that goal, because it would be one of those ones that goes viral more, like, occasionally. I think the fact it was against Bradford in the Championship is why it doesn't. But no, Julio, outstanding player, just one of my favourites ever. Had his name on the back of my shirt when I was a kid. I think most people would agree that he deserves to be right up in the top three.
Yeah. And even his goal on his debut, Gav, went in with a brave header, didn't he, against West Ham?
And did he score a free kick as well? Not long after.
It might have been not long after, yeah, but I just remember that goal on his debut because I thought, God, we've got some player here. So let's move on a little bit, because Bomber, I'm about to bring the other lads in on Chris Macon, who they both had agreement as they both had him in fourth. However, you dragged him down the combined table by having him in bottom place. I mean, we've got a fullback here who was instrumental in us getting 105 points on the way to winning a title. Then he was comfortable in the Premier League as we finished seventh. And I was just looking on in terms of, and it's quite amazing actually, because he played 314 games for Sunderland, scored 1 goal, by the way, but played 314 games, signed him for £1 million. And over 314 games, he has, by a little bit of a distance, the biggest win percentage, 63% over 314 games over 4 years. I mean, incredible record considering how much we signed him for. I know you can go back to the time in terms of, how much we bought him for. But no, you've got him in last place behind the likes of George Carney and Dennis Serkin. And yeah.
Yeah, and there's no I'm fully aware I'm doing him a disservice. I fully accept that. But like I said, for me, Sunderland was established in 1998, 1999. So, he's very early in my Sunderland following career. Can you call it? No, whatever it is. My Sunderland following journey, let's say.
Fandom.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm aware of how good he was for us. I'm aware that he's part of, that 105 point season and the seasons where we finished seventh in the Premier League. But like I said, my top 5 is based pretty much purely on emotions. And, I was on my falling in love with Sunderland journey at that point. And I guess outside of Quinn and Phillips, and some of the others, he didn't really make me feel the same way that Quinn, Phillips, and the like, and Sorensen and the likes did.
Well, it's interesting because I'll come to Jonny on this because you've got him in fourth, Jonny. I think you've both got him in fourth, I think. And, he was a bit early on for you.
Yeah.
But you could argue, I mean, Bomber's just said that, the way these players make you feel. We talked about who do you want having everything, scoring wonderful goals, all this sort of stuff. And I've got clips of him in my head. But in terms of Chris Macon, you could argue that he was just a stopper. I mean, he scored 1 goal, but the famous, everyone was telling him to shoot every time he had the ball. You could argue, I mean, Bomber has got him 10th, but you could argue, you look at the list of players and you'd say, well, actually, Chris Macon had one thing to him that he defended, and he defended very, very well. He was one of the best defensive fullbacks I've seen in the Sunderland strip, but you could argue he didn't have the other side of his game.
Yeah, I think you could. I mean, obviously, like you say, very, very early on for me, so not one that I, would say that I was watching week in, week out with my season ticket.
God, I hate young'uns.
At the age for a couple of years,
signed he was born a year after Megan signed, for God's sake, honestly, man.
But he's
makes you sick.
He's one of those though, I think, where you've got to just respect what he achieved in a Sunderland shirt. There's a few of those picks that I've made on some of the top 10s I've been on where there's just players that you just know they have to be up there in these lists. He was, starting nearly every week for a team who finished 7th in the Premier League 2 seasons running, the 105 point season, just purely going off the kind of honours section of his Wikipedia page or whatever.
I'm glad you researched for this.
I've researched a little bit more than that, I promise. But yeah, he's got to be up there, and I think the consistency as well. It's in a way, it's a similar argument I think that you can make for somebody like Phil Bardsley, where you say, yeah, okay, he wasn't a flashy player. He didn't, like you say, he didn't have Julio Arca-esque moments or anything like that necessarily, but he was trusted immensely by Peter Reid, who, is up there, if not number 1 manager that we've had in this same period we're looking at. So it's similar to what Bomber was saying about Bardsley, I think. You look at the manager he played under, you look at the teams he was in, for him to have been trusted enough to start every game near enough, I think that basically tells its own story. And for me, Chris Macon is somebody who I'm looking at Trey Hume and thinking, yeah, in a year's time, if you've pulled any sort of good performance level out in the Premier League, you're probably going above him for the reason that you just said, Chris, which is that really as a player, he didn't have many strings to his bow. Whereas I think you look at the fullbacks that come through the game, now in the kind of the modern era, and they tend to be better all-round footballers. So that's where somebody like a Chris Macon, I think, will end up suffering and end up sliding down the lists. But for now, I think still on the strength of what he achieved, I think he's got to be up there.
Come on, Gav. You had Macon in fourth. You saw him play. You saw his tackles. You saw him do his long diagonals to Quinny. Tell us about Chris Macon.
Just a quality operator, wasn't he? Absolutely brilliant footballer. And wasn't the most pleasing on the eye from an attacking perspective. I mean, my most prominent memories of Chris Macon are the crowd shouting shoot every time he got within 45 yards of goal, because he did it once and it worked. Someone just presumed, oh well, he's gonna score every time he gets within 45 yards of goal, which he didn't. He got one goal in 143 appearances for Sunderland. But you were talking about win percentages earlier. He's got the highest, I think, of anyone on this list. Played in more winning games than any other player on this list. And obviously is synonymous with that really famous team which Peter Reid put together, and not only got to a playoff final, but won the league at a canter with 105 points and then finished 7th 2 seasons in a row. Chris Macon was synonymous with that period, and sadly, whatever happened with him happened, and Peter Reid and him didn't see eye to eye on things, and he moved on. But just an outstanding player, just a brilliant fullback. And again, I keep coming back to this, your typical Sunderland right back who loved to put their foot in, who was hard as nails, who you could depend upon, who was always there when you needed him. Chris Macon's that man. And it's always interested me that he a bit like Nicky Sumby ahead of him on that right-hand side, didn't do a lot else either side of Sunderland. Yeah, he played for a lot of teams. I know he had a good stint with Ipswich and then had a couple of periods away with, he had Leicester, loan at Derby, played for Reading, Southampton at the back end of his career. But Sunderland was the highlight of Chris Macon's career. He didn't have long stints out of their clubs where he played hundreds of games, and I don't know what that was. Maybe it was injuries, maybe it was a factor of things, but him and Sunderland just seem to suit each other. And that's what I actually think, since he played for Sunderland, Chris Macon has almost been the benchmark for every other right back that we've ever had. You always compare them to Chris Macon, and that's why I treat him second for me, because I think he's the only right back we've had since Chris Macon who's been better than him. Genuinely, I think he's that good, but he's got traits of Macon in him, and Macon was just a real hard nut, and a nice bloke too. I've had the opportunity to speak to him in the past. Really good fella, still speaks really well about Sunderland, keeps up with our results, and I think is doing well for himself out in the Middle East now these days. So yeah, Chris Macon, somebody who I think again, like Julio Walker, if you asked a selection of Sunderland fans to pick a top 10, he would. I actually think a lot of people would probably have him higher than fourth. I've maybe done him a little bit of a disservice in the eyes of some. But yeah, the only reason I have him lower than Julio is because I think Arca was better going forward. I think Arca was a good all-rounder. Chris Macon, you mentioned before, them long diagonals up to Quinny, he had a raker of a right foot on him. But for whatever reason, I don't know whether it's because he could rely on Nicky Sumby to do all of the crossing into the box and stuff. He didn't need to do it. Maybe he didn't need to get forward as much as Mickey Gray did down the other side. But still was a good all-round footballer. Just, yeah, that little bit less about him than some of the others ahead of him. But Chris Macon, somebody who I'll always speak fondly of. I haven't got a bad word to say about him, really.
Yeah. And just a couple to go through now, because Johnny, you had Danny Rose in your top 3. And thinking about to Danny Rose, I remember him being almost a one-man team when he came in on loan. But what's your memories of him? And just based on your list, what did Alonso have on him in terms of, because they were both had loan spells and had impacts like that, but what did Alonso have him that pipped him into second?
Well, pipped into second is the way to put it as well, because I think on another day, I could very, very easily have argued for Rose ahead of Alonso. I think they were both class. Override memories of Rose, like you say, a bit of a one-man team, and it was just one of those loan deals that, we've had a few of them. you think of like Johnny Evans was another example where you just look at the player and think, how the hell are you playing for us? Like, how have you ended up here? Because you're better than this. You know, that team that he was in 12-13, obviously O'Neill ends up getting sacked and Di Canio comes in. And like, yeah, we stayed up, but even under Di Canio, when we were in the middle of getting the new manager bounce, we still shipped 6 away at Villa. Like, that was a rubbish team. With like Mikhail Mandron coming off the bench trying to steal a goal at the end at Villa Park. And Rose just looked a cut above for me. Another one that I was devastated.
Remember that goal against Villa though?
Actually, I can't even remember who scored.
I can't.
Because
I was there.
Because I was in the Villa end. Yeah, I was in the Villa end because I went with my boss at the time, and I had to sit on my hands until everyone just started laughing after the 5th. I can't remember what it was. But Danny Rose scored our goal that day, and he basically took on half the Villa. He actually equalised for us.
Yeah,
and he took on half the Villa side from the left, cut in, and he went straight in and scored an absolutely cracking goal.
Yeah, for some reason in my head, that goal just didn't happen in that game. I think because I've cleansed everything about that game from my memory, apart from
I wish I was able to, but For the first half an hour, I was trying to avoid a kick, and then in the last of it, I had thousands of people laughing at me.
Yeah, well, but like I say, that just goes to show that in our worst defeat of the season, probably on paper, who was it who's popping up with a goal? It's Danny Rose from left back, because he was just too good, wasn't he?
He genuinely that day he just thought, sod it. I'm not going to pass to any of these numpties, and we're just going to do it myself.
Yeah, if yous are all going to keep doing this shit, I'm just going to do it for yous. Like, he was that good as well. Like, he could do it. And similar to Alonso, devastated that we didn't sign him at the end of the loan spell. I remember there being a lot of crack that apparently Danny Rose had wanted to come back. And, you know, I think was he from Doncaster originally or something? So there was whispers about, he wants to be back further north, closer to home. And, you know, there was a couple of weeks where I did think we were going to do it and sign him, but obviously didn't happen in the end, and he went on to slightly bigger and better things. But just a quality player. And I think possibly in the end what's shaded Alonso over him for me is that, again, similar to Van Aanholt with Rose, his pace was a big asset, which isn't a bad thing, but you don't need any skill to be fast. You just need to be fast. Like, you just either are or you aren't. Whereas I think Alonso possibly was a slightly technically better footballer than Rose, but like I say, you're splitting hairs at that point. You know, you're comparing two elite defenders. So just Rose, like I say, for me, cut above the rest of that squad and fully deserves a place in the top 3 just on ability. Yeah,
and Gav, he just made your top 5. I mean, he didn't play many games for Sunderland. I'm just trying to have a quick look. I think he played 29 times for Sunderland, and he just scored that one goal. But he was clearly going to go. We were his first big loan move. He'd only done Bristol City, Peterborough, Watford before that. And he was clearly going to go back to Tottenham and get in their team, wasn't he?
Yeah, and we kind of kidded ourselves at the time that we might sign him as well. We were like, we had a succession of these because I think he was the first. Then the next season we brought in Marcus Alonso in the January, and then we didn't keep him. And then eventually we settled on Patrick Van Aanholt. But Danny Rose was like that was a really drab season, wasn't it? It was a pretty crap, boring season. The football wasn't great. And he was the shining light. I mean, did he get voted player of the season at the end of that season? I think he did, didn't he?
I can't remember anyone else who played for us, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't want to remember anyone else who played for us.
And it's a little bit sad that we've got loanees so high in our list. But, you know, he went on after that to establish himself at Tottenham. I think he was England's first choice left back then for 4 years after that, only broken up slightly by an injury that he had. And like Alonso, I think it was Sunderland who made him. I think, you know, if he hadn't had that, because you said he had the loans with Watford, Peterborough, Bristol City in the Championship, where, you know, I don't know how he did in them loan spells, presumably pretty well. But then came to us in the Premier League and really showed what he could do, and went back to Tottenham, a totally different footballer, and then became their first choice left back for 5 seasons. So, you know, Danny Rose, outstanding player. And I'm a little bit gutted the way that his career tailed off. I think he had a lot of problems off the pitch, and he's spoken very openly about that, his mental health issues and things like that, which I think affected his career towards the back end. And I think he was one of these players who just needed an arm around him. And that's maybe why him and Martin O'Neill meshed well. Because Martin O'Neill was that type of manager. If he got his arm around you, he could get the best out of you. and that certainly worked for him. And it wasn't, I think it was towards the end of his time with Tottenham when Mourinho was in charge where things started to tail off a bit for him, and he fell out of favour, and then his career kind of ended on a damp note, which is sad, really, because I think he was an outstanding player. But again, somebody who, we talked about that pace that he had, he could defend too. He was a good defender as well, Danny Rose. And yeah, just he gets in at 5th ahead of Bardsley because I just think, again, better all-rounder, had more of an impact. Might have been in a shorter space, but had more of an impact. And I think he was just better than Marcus Alonso in that time period that he was with us. Maybe didn't go on and have the better career, but was better than him. So yeah, I think he deserves to be about, I think he's about right where he is in my list. I think 5th's about fair.
Interesting to see Johnny nodding his head when you said he's better than Alonso. Interesting that. But, the lads that have been in their top 5s, you had him 9th, only Chris Macon behind him. But it's interesting, when we're talking about it there, because actually you were talking about Patrick Van Arnold being almost that shining light when things were bad at that time. Danny Rose had a similar impact, but probably, okay, over 29 games or whatever in that season. But Danny Rose was similar in that he played in an awful Sunderland side and he really stuck out. Yeah,
I mean, for me, Marcus Alonso and Danny Rose are synonymous with each other in terms of when we're making these assessments, because they're both neither of them have a particularly long period of time. Both had a decent impact. I think for me, like I've said, he can't make my top 5 because of the way I've structured my top 5 in terms of how they've made me feel as a fan and having watched them, etc. He was part of a god awful team, and he was a shining light in that. But I don't know. I've got him 9th and ahead of Marcus Alonso, and that was what my thinking was. Is actually they're both going to be in, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, let's say. But who goes over the other? And I think Marcus Alonso's contribution in fewer games, with the Great Escape, with the League Cup, he just pips it for me. And again, I go back to thinking about Danny Rose's career, and the best version of Danny Rose wasn't at Sunderland; it was at Tottenham. It was don't forget, he also played in the Olympics. He was part of the Great Britain Olympic team. And the caps that he's had for England. I've probably thought about it too much in separating Danny Rose, the career after Sunderland, and how well we remember him and how good we remember him for then, versus the Sunderland version of Danny Rose, which is still good, but it's almost like tarnished a little bit because he stood out in an absolute pig shit team. So in my mind, I'm kind of like, well, does he look good because he's by far the best of a bad bunch? And actually he went back to Tottenham and was even better. So it's kind of muddled my thinking. So for me, they were both going to come near the bottom. It was just who was going to come slightly above the other.
Yeah. And let's move on to Gav with your top spot. Mickey Gray. Look, I'm not sure what much you can see. I was there on his debut at Roker Park in 92, November 92, I think it was, against Barnsley. He was on the edge of the box and he volleyed it in from the edge of the box on his debut. And I remember thinking, because you heard about this kid coming through, and then Terry Butcher gave him his chance. And then he goes on to get England caps and do what he does, 410 appearances, 17 goals. And, gave us some of the best kind of years from a fullback, just bombing on and just running up and down the flank. And you saw us during those years, Gav, and you've got him in top spot.
Yeah, I think his legacy, his achievements are what put him ahead of several of these players. I think on pure ability, he's quite close to a few of them. I just think when you look at what he actually went on to do for Sunderland, and the fact he got England caps when we were playing in the First Division, I mean, that's commendable. Him and Kevin Phillips did that, and it'll probably never happen again for a Sunderland player. I mean, hopefully we're never in the second tier again, but let's say we are. I mean, it'll never happen again that we get England caps for our players at that level. And you mentioned you were there right at start of his career, it was a long time really before he became this sort of well-known focal point, part of the team where, we're talking about 7-8 years down the line. I mean, it's funny because that photo's been going around of Mickey Gray in the blue Hummel strip, and you kind of forget he was there that early, wasn't he? Like, he was right back at the start of the 90s. He was part of that team, and it wasn't really until Peter Reid's team got motor in that he, I guess, really established. We think about Mickey Gray, we think about that team, don't we? We don't think about all the years before it when he was playing on the left wing. We think about him as a left back when he was moved back into left back and had Alan Johnson in front of him.
Yeah, Martin Scott has a huge part to play in his career, because when he came in, he originally came in as a left back, and Terry Butcher was saying he's going to be a future England national left back. And then Mick Buxton bought Martin Scott. Then he got moved to left midfield, and I think that was possibly the worst thing for him in those early years, because it wasn't until Martin Scott got that long-term injury, he got moved back to full-back and never looked back, and then he got back in his position, and that was it. You saw what a player he was, and like, there's always that debate, Gav, with Alan Johnson, but it's funny because when this debate comes up saying, oh, well, did Mickey Gray make Johnson, or did Johnson help Mickey Gray? Well, when Schwartz went there, Mickey Gray was still brilliant. Yeah,
exactly. And I think it again, that proved just how good he was. I mean, when you shut your eyes and you think of Mickey Gray and you think of moments, you think of that cross for Quinny's header, don't you? That's the one that comes straight to mind. Mickey Gray's and there was that ability. I mean, Summerby gets the plaudits for the crosses from the right-hand side, and rightly so. But Mickey Gray, his ability to get beyond players and take them on. I think Bomber said something about Van Aanholt being, the modern fullback before they were a modern fullback. I think it stretches further back than that. You look at Mickey Gray, he was doing that in the 90s and the early 2000s, going, playing high up the pitch and going beyond people. But he was a grafter too. I mean, I've heard loads of players who played with him talk about how he was the fittest person in training. He was always the first in running. Like Mickey Gray kept, and he still does. I mean, you look at him now, he looks like he could still play now. He's in great nick now. So somebody who always looked after himself. But yeah, I mean, the fact that he played for England in the first division just shows how anybody listening who didn't get to watch that team, try and just compartmentalise how massive an achievement that is to play for England, not Republic of Ireland, no disrespect, but not Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Wales. That happens. Players in the Championship play for those countries. How often do Championship players play for England?
There's some good fullbacks in the Premier League at that point as well. It wasn't like he got in just because there was nobody else either. Yeah. I mean, Johnny, Gav's just put that question to someone who never saw him play. And I don't know if you did you catch any of them towards the end or not?
Picking his nose and running around the concourse, ignoring the game at that point, man.
Trapping himself, bro.
I physically, I think, watched him with my own eyes, but how many minutes of that game I might remember, shaky. But there's not much I can add beyond what Gavin and yourself have said, to be honest, really. I think you can't make 360 odd league appearances and 400 plus in all competitions after coming through the academy, being a local lad, winning the championship a couple of times, or obviously the first division, it was before the rebrand. So, winning the second division a couple of times, playing for England, again, 2 7th place finishes.
You've got Wikipedia open again, haven't you?
No, I promise.
Remember this.
I promise. I had it open yesterday. But no, like, you just, that if you were to kind of envision for a young player coming through the academy, or what might your Sunderland career look like if the stars align and everything's going as well as it can, almost, that's the career you'd pick, almost. Like, England caps, tick. Silverware, I know, obviously not winning a cup or anything, but you've lifted trophies, tick. You've made hundreds and hundreds of appearances. You've played with some of the best players in the club's history, in people like Quinn and Phillips. Names that are going to be remembered forever. And a lot of people would say Mickey Gray's etched his name into that sort of list. I don't think he's necessarily as good a player as like Kevin Phillips was or whatever, but he's had the career that you would pick if you were coming through the Sunderland Academy. So I think he's fully deserved to be top of this list. It's like, maybe someone like Chris Rigg, you might be thinking, okay, you're hoping he's got a higher ceiling in terms of, natural talent, but Chris Rigg could do a hell of a lot worse than having Mickey Gray's career.
Yeah. And Bomber, you've already kind of touched on the fact that he might have been kind of, slightly early in terms of you following Sunderland. He just made your top 5. But one thing we hadn't kind of mentioned, Gav's touched on that England cap in the First Division. But the season before, obviously, the big thing we haven't mentioned is he missed a penalty. But we've seen, goalkeepers make mistakes and just that's it. You never see them again, or they just disappear, or people have big, high-profile moments like this and they just they shrink. He came back in pre-season, bleached his hair, came back with bright blonde hair, and kind of was one of the best players to gets us 105 points and gets an England cap. To do that from a moment of despair, and I always like the Bobby Saxton story of that they get back on the coach and Mickey Gray's in bits, and the club had been getting phone calls about Mickey Gray going out on town and giving it the "Do you know who I am?" line, and apparently Bobby Saxton just went, "Well, next time someone says." When you say, do you know who I am? They'll say, yeah, you're that twat that missed the penalty. But he came back from all of that to have that season and then go on to do what he did and just grow from that. Not many players do that.
No, and it's absolute. It speaks to the character of the man, and just how ingrained he is in Sunderland folklore. All the very best players have a little bit of arrogance about them, etc., etc. And you're right. In a moment that has cost such high stakes, some people, you're right, don't come back from that. Some people might take a season or half a season to come back from it, and it's kind of forgotten. But pre-season is very short, so to go from the end of May, the despair that he put on himself in missing that penalty, to then just hit the ground running in pre-season, some 6 weeks later. Fully aware that you're still a second division player on the back of a mistake that obviously you didn't mean to make, but have made, and ultimately take responsibility for the reason not just you, but your teammates and your fan base are not playing in the top division. That would have broke a lot of players. So to go on and not just recover from that, but supersede that and excel in the way that he did. Like I said, it speaks to his character. He's a Sunderland legend, and if nothing else, that penalty miss was the gateway for me on my Sunderland journey into loving the club, as you all know, and I've spoken about on a number of podcasts before. I'm sure if he ever does listen to this, he'll probably not fancy me putting him in 5th place, and he probably does deserve higher. If it was a top 10 of my personal Sunderland legends, he'd be second behind Julio, without a doubt. Actually, then we start talking about Quinn and Phillips. So he's in the top 5. He's in the top 5 of my Sunderland legends. But yeah, I just think he's made it into that top 5 because of how, like I said a few times, how he's made me feel. It's certainly not a detraction from him or his ability or what he means to Sunderland. There's literally, a sheet of paper width between 5th and 4th and 3rd and 2nd and 1st for me. So it's not meant as any sort of disrespect. I love Mickey Gray. I don't know what else to say.
You're putting a big asterisk next to your listing.
I am, because the more we talk about him, the more I feel like I've screwed him over by putting him in 5th. Because objectively, and without context, having Mickey Gray 5th in a list of top 10 fullbacks sounds like an absolute travesty. And I'm fully aware that that's the case. But I hope I've gone some way in explaining why my top 5 is the way it is, in explaining why he is 5th. But it's certainly not a slight on him.
Just say that you're including his punditry career in this calculation, and then 5th,
yeah,
might be generous.
We'll go with that. Just one thing as well, and it's completely unrelated to Mickey Gray, because obviously he was quite quick, but he wasn't the quickest. I'm really looking forward to the interview between Jonny and Usain Bolt, where Jonny tells him that you need no skill to have pace.
He's a fraud, that lad.
One of the many quotes that has come out today's podcast that I think might
I was
be
just trying to take the spotlight off myself.
Yeah. Well, look, we've gone through everybody's top 10. We've gone through the whole list. We've discussed everyone in there. So, look, let's take the averages of the three lists, because that means the top 10 is in 10th, George McCartney. Number 9, Dennis Serkin. Number 8, Patrick Van Arnold, even though Bomber tried desperately to drag him up that leaderboard. Number 7 was Chris Makin, who plummeted down the leaderboard.
Jesus. That's abysmal. People are going to stop tuning in these top 10s.
I won't be asked back, will I?
Number 6 was Danny Rose, who again got dragged down because of Bomber's 9th place pick. But Marcus Alonso was 5th because Jonny dragged him up the leaderboard. Julio Arca was number 4. Phil Bardsley was number 3. Second was Trey Hume, and top spot was, by some distance actually, was Michael Gray. And look, just because all the lads have stuck their heads on the chopping block, my 10 very quickly. I had Patrick Van Arnold in 10th. Apologies, Bomber. I had George McCartney in 9th. Dennis Serkin in 8th. Marcus Alonso in 7th. Phil Bardsley in 6th. Trey Hume in 5th. Danny Rose 4th. Chris Makin 3rd. Julio Arca in 2nd. And Michael Gray in top spot. So that was my top 10. If anyone...
Me and you weren't a million miles off each other there. Listen to that.
I haven't looked, but okay. Well, this is the point. No two lists are going to be the same, and everyone's going to be screaming at us in terms of their top 10. Everyone's going to be screaming at us, but just about the top 10 shortlist itself before we even get to ordering them. So let us know who you think was unlucky not to make the top 10, and please give us your feedback on your top 10 orderings, because it's...
And by the way, Bomber can be found at Bomber8T5 on Twitter, just in case you want to
soon to be disabled.
Yeah, do not at Roker Report on. But no, so let us know. Everyone's got different views and stuff, and it's fun going through these top 10s because you do get to see them. But this fallback one is kind of gone way beyond what I thought we would because of the debate. It's gone on longer than any of the others. So thank you very much, Jonny.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks to Gavin Bomber, particularly Bomber, for taking some of the heat off me.
And cheers, Bomber, because I mean, Johnny's got the biggest grin on his face. Honestly, he thought that John Mensah thing was going to live forever.
Well, I felt sorry for Jonny, so I thought I'd take some of the heat off of him. But so I'll say thank you and fully anticipate not being asked to another one of these.
I want you on every one, to be honest. And thanks again, Gav. Cheers, mate.
No problem. Thank you very much.
And well, before we go, Gav, we've got loads coming up on How We Are the Podcast.
Always, every single day, mate. Because of how crazy this summer has been, we just seem to be reacting to different things every day, but it's given us plenty to talk about. So loads of podcasts every single day. Sometimes twice a day if a big story drops. But yeah, loads and loads coming up, mate. To be honest, with pre-season starting, I'm expecting it to ramp up again at the start of the new week. So yeah, busy.
Yeah, sometimes on a weekend you're expecting a lie-in and then the bat signal goes out from Gav. So, you know, something might have actually happened and we need to jump on and talk about it. But, well, thanks again, everyone, for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed recording it. Like Gav says, we'll have loads of daily releases on How We're the Podcast, and check out the Roker Report website for all of the latest information on Sunderland FC. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.